Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. Today is day 9 of Python for DevOps series, and in this video we will deep dive into the concept called loops. So loops is a fundamental concept that is available across all the programming languages. It can be C, C++, Java, Python, Node.js, any programming language, you will find this concept called loops. But what exactly are we going to learn today? That is, what is the agenda for today? So in today's video, we will start with understanding what exactly loops means. And then we will try to understand loops in Python. What are the different types of loops in Python? After that, we will learn a little advanced concept, the loop control statements. So how to control the execution of loop. I'll explain that in detail. There we will learn about break and continue statements. And finally, we will understand loops from DevOps engineer point of view. Now, this is very, very important. If you go to the day 9 folder, just like I create these folders for each and every day, and I try to share whatever I'm teaching in the class so that you can use those notes for your revision purpose. In today's video, we will cover for loop from DevOps use cases point of view and while loop from DevOps use cases point of view. So this notes is also written so that you can refer after the video for your revision purpose. But this is something that you will not find anywhere. It is very difficult to come up with this kind of use cases and explain you why and how DevOps engineers use the loops. I can just explain using some basic examples, a very generic ones, but I wanted to make sure after this video, you understand how and why loops are used in the day-to-day life of a DevOps engineer. So please watch this video till the end. And before I move towards the whiteboard, let me quickly tell you if you are a new subscriber. So we are doing this series called Python for DevOps. We have already completed 8 episodes. And the course syllabus for the first 8 episodes, you can find in this GitHub repository in the README file. And if you are interested watching the first 8 episodes, which I'll highly recommend, please go to the Python for DevOps playlist and you can watch the first 8 videos. Okay, now let's move towards the whiteboard and start understanding what exactly the loops are. First of all, the beginning of the video, I told you that this is a fundamental concept that is available across all the programming languages. The question is why? Why does every programming language has this concept called as loops? So what exactly loops does is if you want to perform a repetitive action, okay, understand this carefully. If you want to perform a repetitive action on a block of code, that means on one line of code, 2 lines of code, 10 lines of code, or 100 lines of code. That's why I'm saying on a block of code, then we will use loops. For example, let's say you want to print something called as print my name is Abhishek.Veeramalla. Okay. Now, this is a block of code, right? Of course, this is only one line of code. This can be 1 line, 2 lines, or 10 lines. Now, if someone asks you, can you execute this? Like if you want to execute this, you will write a Python file and you will just write this line of code and you will tell them to execute the file and they will see this print Abhishek. But what if you want to execute this 100 times? What if you want to execute this 10,000 times? If there is no concept called loops in Python, you need to write this print statement 10,000 times, right? If someone asks you to print it 1 million times, then you have to print it 1 million times, right? Now, to avoid this, what you can actually do is use this concept called loops. So now did you understand the definition? If you want to perform repetitive action on a block of code, then you need to use the concept of loops. Now, what you can do with loops is instead of writing this statement 10,000 times or 100 times, you can simply say for I in, so don't worry about the syntax at this point of time, range of 10,000 print Abhishek. Now let's see if this works or not. Okay, before I go ahead and explain you further, now let's see if this is true or not, what I'm explaining. Right? So let's go to the code spaces, and in Day-9 folder, let's create a file called test.py. Okay, now let me first write something called as print Abhishek. Right? Now, if you obviously switch to the Day-9 folder, and if you execute python test.py, you will see Abhishek once. Now, if you want to print this 5 times, okay, what you will do is you will just copy paste this 5 times and you will execute this 5 times. Perfect. But if you want to do it 1 million times, if you want to do it 10 million times, would you print this 10 million times? Like even copy pasting is also very difficult, right? So for 5 times, I just copy pasted it in 2 to 3 seconds. But what if you want to copy paste it 1 million times, right? For example, these days when you use some programs, right, you will see something like dot, 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 right? Until the execution of the program is done. So here indirectly, they are using some loops itself. Now let's try to convert this to the format that I've just explained. So what I'll do is, let's say I want to execute this 10 times. So I'll just say for I in range. Don't worry about the syntax at this point of time. Like I told you, I'll explain what this range keyword is and what is this for keyword, what is this in keyword. Don't worry about that. Print Abhishek. Now let us see if this program prints this line called print Abhishek 10 times or not. Perfect. Now let me put this loop statement and print Veeramalla as well. Okay. Now what this for loop has to do, it has to execute repetitively, that is 10 times, the block of code that is written inside the loop. Okay, that means it has to print Abhishek.Veeramalla 10 times. Let's see again. Perfect. It prints Abhishek.Veeramalla. Both these lines, it prints 10 times. So that's why what we call a loop as is repetitive execution of a block of code. It can be 1 line of code, 2 lines of codes, 10 lines of codes, and even if you put some 100 lines inside this loop statement, that is inside this particular execution, it will print 100 lines 10 times, because here you said to print it 10 times. Okay, so the textbook definition of loops is clear. Repetitive execution of a particular block of code is called as loops. Now, here comes another important factor. Okay, Abhishek, you said using loops, I can execute statements multiple times. But what exactly you wrote, right? You wrote something called for I in range of 10. And then you wrote something inside this, and that is getting executed multiple times. But what exactly these keywords are? Here there is 1 keyword, 2 keyword, and 3 keywords. In only 1 line of code, I used 3 new keywords in today's class. What exactly these keywords are? Okay, so let me explain you. Basically, there are 2 different types of loops in Python. Number 1 is for loop, and number 2 is while loop. So talking about for loops, which is the one that I've used here, when you know that you need to execute a particular block of statements for a definite time definite number of times, right? That means when you clearly know that you have to execute this block of code one times, two times, three times, or 10 times, or it can be even 1 million times. But when you know that you have to execute it for a specific number of times, then you will use for loops. And the syntax for loop is start with a keyword called for and then use any variable. Here I used I as a variable, right? You can use any variable here and you will use a particular sequence. And between the variable and the sequence, you will use another keyword called as in. Now, what is this sequence? Here I said sequence as range of 10. Range is a keyword in Python. When you use this keyword called range, so this particular line that I've written or this particular statement that I've written, this gets resolved into 1 comma 2 comma 3 comma 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 inside list, right? So what does range do? So range will resolve this particular number. Of course, it starts from 0. Just for an example, I've written these numbers here. So what does range return is range returns a list from 0 to 9. Got it? So range returns a list from 0 to 9. So for a for loop, you have to use a sequence. Okay, now you might ask me that, Abhishek, okay, I understood what exactly loops are, but I did not quite understand the syntax that you have written. You said for I in range of 10, and then you wrote couple of lines, or you said you can write n number of lines. And when you executed it, I understood probably because you are using a number 10 here, this particular lines of code got executed 10 times. But what exactly is this particular line and how do I write this particular line? So before you understand it, you need to understand something, that in Python, there are two kinds of loops. One is for loop and the other is while loop. Now, if you are following this class, you will ask me one more question, that is why there are two different kinds of loops. If both of them are performing the same action, that is to execute a block of code multiple times, then why in Python there are two different kinds of loops or two different kinds of mechanisms? So I'll explain you this in detail, but for now, at this point of time, just understand that when you know how many number of times, that is when you are sure that a definite number of times the lines have to be executed. That is, if this block has to be executed one time, two times, 10 times or 100 times, but you should know this particular number before execution itself, then you will use the for loop. For example, let's say someone asks you to print numbers from 1 to 10. So here you already know that your print statement has to execute 10 times, right? So this is a definite number of times of execution. So you will go with for loops. Whereas if someone tells you that, okay, I am not sure how many times this block of code has to be executed, it can change dynamically. Okay, so probably once this block of code has to be executed 5 times, some other time it has to be executed 10 times, and some other times it has to be executed 100 times. In such cases, when you are not sure or when there is no definite number of times of execution of the block of codes, then go with while loop. We will come with the examples of while loops in a while, but first let's complete the for loop thing. So if you go back to that particular syntax, right? Because to write any particular thing, you have to understand the syntax very clearly, and you need to understand what exactly am I writing. So in this particular line, there are three different keywords. For is a keyword, in is a keyword, and range is another keyword. So 1, 2, and 3. That means you have an opportunity to learn about three keywords just with one line. Let's try to learn. Whenever you want to start a for loop, you need to start using for keyword. Just like when you want to start a function, you use def as a keyword. When you want to start writing a conditional or a condition, then you start with writing if statement. Similarly, when you want to start a for loop, you start with the for keyword. And for basically executes against a sequence. In Python, for loops execute against sequence because sequence are a definite number of things. For example, it can be list, it can be tuple, or any sequence data types. Now you might be wondering, but Abhishek, in the line here, you wrote range of 10. Don't worry, range is a keyword in Python. When you say range of 10, then what this returns is a list of numbers from 0 to 9. So basically, when you write range of 10, this particular Python program returns numbers from 0, 1, 2, 3 up to 9. Got it? Let's see if this is correct or not, right? So let's try to execute this again on our code spaces. Okay, let's restart it. So typically, this is how you have to understand the output of range. Of course, it is slightly different, but for easy understanding, understand that it returns a sequence of numbers from 0 to 9. You can also verify it on the code spaces environment or on your Visual Studio Code. So let's use the same test.py. And what we will do is, instead of writing anything inside this block, let's just write what is the output of print. What is the output of this variable called I. So you will notice that this variable returns cd day9 python test.py, and you will notice that it returns values from 0 to 9, right? See, what did it return? 0, 1, 2, 3 up to 9. So that's how you actually convert this particular line into. So when I say for I in range of 10, that means it is indirectly for I in 0 to 9. Okay. So what is this I? So I is getting replaced with the numbers in the order. This is for the for loop to track if the blocks are, the block of lines are getting executed for definite number of times or not, right? That means when you say for I in 0 to 9, or when you say for I in range of 10, there has to be something for loop to understand if this block of lines got executed 10 times or not. So that's why what we do is we take a variable in the for loop statement. We say for followed by a variable, and in keyword is used in the sequence to transfer numbers, right, from 0 to 1 to 2 to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 up to 9. In is the one that takes one number and puts in this particular variable after execution. Okay, so this program has to get 10 times, right, executed 10 times. So this in statement, firstly, it will store this particular variable, the number it gets assigned as 0. Then next time, once this particular block of code is executed, then it stores 1 inside this variable. After that, it stores 2 inside this variable, 3, 4, 5. And that's how for loop tracks if for a definite number of times this program got executed or not. Okay, I'll make it even more simple if you are any confused here. Okay, what we will do is we will say print I as well as Abhishek. Okay. So now you will clearly notice that this particular variable is getting stored with numbers in serial order 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And simultaneously, this particular line called Abhishek is also getting executed. So if you do Python test.py, you will notice, see, this is an indicator for the for loop. This particular variable is an indicator for loop saying, okay, so this particular line got executed once, twice, thrice, and when it reaches the number called 9, because range is returning 0 to 9, then for loop understands, okay, I started with number called 0, and because range is 10, so I will print it up to the variable reaches the value of 9. That's how for loop tracks it. And this particular syntax does not change. It is always the same. So how do you have to remember this particular syntax? You have to remember this particular syntax as for variable in sequence. And inside this, the block of statements that you want to execute. So for is a keyword variable. You can define I, X, Z, Y, whatever you would like to. In is another keyword which is doing the major part as I've explained. And sequence, whether you want to use range, right? Or you want to use a list, or you want to use a tuple, it's up to you. Abhishek, can you show me an example with list and tuple? For sure. So if you go back, right? And now what we will try to do is let's try to declare a list. Okay. I will say colors is equals to yellow, green, blue. Okay. And now I will say for, let's use a different thing for X in colors. Okay. And here what I will do is I'll just say print X. Now, can anyone guess what is the value of X? So the value of X has to be like I explained, right? Like I explained here, what does this in keyword do? When we are using this particular keyword called in, it will take elements from the color. It can be range, it can be anything. It will take elements from it, and gradually first it will store this particular value or this particular element in the variable, and it will execute this block of code. Once this block of code is executed, then it takes another element and stores that element in the variable called X. And finally, it takes the final element and stores that particular thing in the variable X. So the output has to be yellow, green, and blue. Let's see if that is true or false. See, yellow, green, and blue. This is the output. Got it? Why is the output something like this? Because in is the keyword that is taking each and every element from the sequence, and it is storing in the order. First, in the first time of execution, it will store the first element. In the second time of execution, it will store the second element. And in the third time of execution, it will store the third element. Perfect. If instead of colors, if we use range, okay. Now, again, what would be the output? Output would be 0 to 9, because as I told you, range of 10 is something that you can understand as numbers is equals to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, and 9. You can assume that range returns something like this. That's why when you try to print this particular line, or when you try to print this particular program, first in keyword goes to this number called 0 and stores variable X with value 0. Okay. Then it will try to execute this line of code. If there are 10 lines, it will execute the 10 lines in order. After that, after all the lines are executed, then it will go to the next element. So the next element is 1. So that's why it will go here and store this value called x with 1. So the output has to be 0, 1, 2, 3 up to 9. Let's see if that is true or false. Python test.py. See, starts with 0 and ends with 9. So each and every keyword in this particular program or in this particular for loop statement is very, very important. And this will not change. The syntax is always the same. You have to remember it. Start with the for keyword, use a particular variable, whatever you would like to, then use the in keyword, and finally end it with a sequence. What goes into sequence? Sequence, three things are majorly used. Either you use range, or you use a list, or you use a tuple. Okay. So if you are using range, basically, you know that you are using numbers. Whereas if you are using list, then you might be using some colors or EC2 instances, S3 buckets, whatever it is. And tuple, I have explained what is the difference between list and tuple in the previous videos. So you can also practice these examples. You can go to Day-9 folder. And if you go to loops.md, here I have explained for loops, and in for loops, see the syntax that I have explained for variable in sequence. So here we took example of fruits called apple, banana, and cherry. When you execute this line saying for, here I have taken variable as fruit. You can take variable as X, you can take variable as Y, you can take variable as Z, whatever you would like to. For fruit in fruits, what is fruits? Fruits is a list. So either in the sequence you use list, tuple, or range. Then I said print fruit. So fruit using in keyword goes to apple and first prints apple, goes to banana and next prints banana, and finally goes to cherry and prints cherry. Got it? So this is example of for loop. Now if we go back, right, and I told you that there are two different types of loops. One is for loop, and second thing that I've explained is a while loop. So while loop is something different in terms of number of executions and also in terms of syntax. So while has to be used when you are not sure about number of executions. Okay. Previously, if I was using a list or a tuple or a range, I always know the number of execution. If list size is 10, then I know that my for loop has to be executed 10 times. If range is 0 to 9, then I clearly know that range will return 10 numbers. So that's why my for loop has to be executed 10 times. But while has to be used when you are not aware of the number of executions, and the syntax says while condition. That's it. Okay. And here you write the number of lines or the block of code that has to be printed or repeated. So how many times this block of code, if I'm writing print Abhishek, print Veeramalla, how many times this particular block of code will be executed? You cannot say the answer if you are using while loop, because while loop depends on the condition. If this condition returns 100, then this particular block of code gets 100 times executed. If this condition matches after 10,000 times, then your block of code gets executed 10,000 times. But Abhishek, I'm little confused here. When will you not be sure about number of execution? Can you give an example? For sure. As a DevOps engineer, we work with Linux environment, right? Now, let's say your task is to print Abhishek. Okay. Your job is to print Abhishek. How many times you have to print Abhishek is till all the files, okay, till all the files on your Linux file system are deleted. Okay. Now, this particular thing, all the files on my Linux file system or all the files in a folder, let's say. Okay. So your job is to print Abhishek how many number of times till all the files in a particular folder are deleted. Now, see, there can be n number of folders in your system. If you are using for loop, the problem is that, in one folder there might be 10 files, in another folder there might be 100 files, and in another folder there might be 1000 files. Okay. So if you are using for loop, you are defining how many number of times this particular files have to be deleted. Whereas if you are using a while loop, okay, what happens is you are saying while files in folder are empty. Okay. So I'm not writing the code here. Let's clear this and write it. So here for the program that I've explained, what I will do, while files in folder are empty. Okay. Print deleting files. Okay. Let's say I will print deleting files. Process is going on. Or I'll say print deleting files and I'll write another called as print process is going on. Okay. So what happens here, till the number of files in the folder are empty, on the terminal, you will see this lines called deleting files, and then you will see the process is going on, right? If you are using for loop in this particular aspect, what will happen? Probably there is a folder called TMP, and you know that inside the TMP folders, there are 10 files. So what you will do, you will say for I in range of 10, and you will write RM minus RF or just RM, right? And in Python, there is a different thing for deleting files, but let's say you will say delete a particular file. Next time, when you move to a different folder, in that particular folder, there can be 100 files. In another folder, there can be 1000 files. So the for loop that you have written for TMP folder will not work for another folder. Whereas if you are using while loop, because while loop depends on a condition where you are saying till files in folder are empty, till that particular time, delete all the files. Got it? I'll give you more examples. Usually we work with Kubernetes, right? And you can say while kubectl get deploy, okay, and probably you can perform some JSON action and you can get number of deployments. Okay, basically what I'm trying to do is you will use kubectl get deploy some JSON action and you will get the number of deployments or number of pods in your Kubernetes namespace. Till that particular time, print pod name or deployment name is equals to something. Now again, you cannot use a for loop here because kubectl get deploy can return one deployment, it can return two deployments, or it can return 100 deployments. It depends on namespace, it depends on project, and it depends on a lot of things, right? So when this thing is not clear, you will go with while loop. There are so many examples that I have. If you go to Day-9 folder, right? If you go to while loop DevOps use cases, let's take a look at the use cases that I have here. First one is this one where I'm saying while kubectl get deploy my app, and then I'm saying using a pipe statement. Of course, this is a shell script example that I've put here because if I try to put this in Python at this point of time, you will get little confused because we cannot execute shell commands as is in Python at this point of time. So I have used a shell example, but later when we move to a point where you are master in Python, I'll replace these commands with Python examples. But to understand the use case, the while loop is same in shell script or Python scripting. So here I'm saying while kubectl get deployment, and I am verifying if the pods are available or not. Okay. Then I'm saying waiting on my app to be ready. That is waiting on the pod to be ready. Here I cannot use a for loop because kubectl get deployment is not static. It returns number of outputs depending upon the namespaces and depending upon the projects. Similarly, all the examples are in shell scripting only, and this is done deliberately because these are shell commands which do not work in Python. We will have to modify this. We will use modules in Python and change these things. For now, just understand the concept of while loop. That's it. So here, what I did is while describe the EC2 instances that are in running state. That means again, this is a dynamic value. This is not a static value where we cannot use a for loop. Log analysis is one more example. I've used one more example for database replication and synchronization. Right? So here some 5 examples that I've used. And if you go back to for loop also, I have some examples where again the syntax is for loop, shell scripting, because the conditions that I'm writing are related to shell commands. So here again I'm saying for server in, where I'm using a list, so I know, okay, there are 3 number of servers, right? Another example is, let's say you have to deploy application in 3 different environments, dev, staging, and prod. Here the number of environments are already known to you. That's why you are using a for loop. Backup operation, let's say there are 3 DBs. So you know that there are 3 databases. So again, you will use a for loop. Similarly, I've put some 3 more examples. So please go through this particular thing as your revision so that you understand, okay, this is why while loop and this is why for loop are used. And one more topic that we have today is let me clear the screen. So final topic that I want to explain you today is, you can consider it as loop manipulation, right? Or you can consider it as loop statements, whatever it is. But there are 2 particular statements that you have to run, which are nothing but break statement. And the other thing is the continue statement. These are very, very simple if you understand what exactly they are doing. So the name break itself says that, when you want to break the for loop. So for loop, basically what it does is, if you ask the for loop to execute 100 times, it will keep executing 100 number of times. But let's say you have a condition that if there is a number called 45, okay, if this loop encounters a number called 45, there itself you have to terminate the loop. Okay, it's just nothing but, let's say you want to print numbers from 1 to 10, and whenever the loop encounters the first prime number, okay, then you have to terminate the loop. So when you want to terminate a loop, when a particular condition is met, then you will use a break statement. For example, if you go to the loop controls, I've given you an example where what I am doing is I am taking numbers from 1 to 5. That means this loop gets executed 5 times. And here I am saying, if the number is equals to 3, then break. So if you see, what will be the output? It will only print 1 and 2. And because there is a break statement that is saying to break the loop or to stop the execution of loop, when number matches 3, the output will only be 1 and 2. If this particular condition is not there, then the output would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which we already saw. But here you are using a break statement, which will tell the for loop to break the execution. Okay, so we will use some conditions like this. Then there is a statement called continue. What continue will do is, when a particular number is matched or when a particular condition is matched, it will just skip that particular execution and move forward with the rest of the executions. That means when you have numbers called 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, when the condition is matched, here the condition is number is equals to 3, then the output will be 1, 2, 4, and 5, right? So what is the difference between a break statement and a continue statement? It is very simple. When you are using a break statement, it will break the execution. Whereas when you are using continue statement, it will skip the particular condition and continue with the next lines of the execution, right? So I've given a very simple and basic example here. So if you are using this particular thing, and if you are using a condition on number 3, and if you are using break statement, output would be 1 and 2. Similarly, if you are using a continue statement, what will happen is it will ignore number 3 but continue with the next lines. So it will print 1, 2, 4, and 5. Don't worry, when we come up with the DevOps use cases class, where we are going to use real-time DevOps functions and modules like Boto 3, then we will use a lot of break and continue things. For today's class, please go through the exercises that I have provided and try to execute them so that you will be confident with the loop statements. Got it? So tomorrow's class is going to be very exciting. So I hope you will come to the next class by following whatever I have provided in today's class. Thank you so much. See you all in the next one. Bye bye.